This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Welcome to Late Boomers, our podcast guide to creating your third act with style, power, and impact. Hi, I'm Cathy Worthington.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Join us as we bring you conversations with successful entrepreneurs, entertainers, and people with vision who are making a difference in the world.
Everyone has a story, and we'll take you along for the ride on each interview, recounting the journey our guests have taken to get where they are, inspiring you to create your own path to success. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Cathy Worthington, welcoming you to the Late Boomers podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Mary Elkins, and we're going to be talking with Gina Osborn, Army veteran, former Chief Safety and Security Officer at LA Metro, and retired FBI Assistant Special Agent in charge of fighting cyber terrorism and safeguarding national security.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Gina is also a TEDx speaker and the host of Making Maverick Moves podcast. We're looking forward to talking to her about her work leading the FBI's cybercrime and counterterrorism operations in Los Angeles and hearing more about her podcast. Welcome, Gina.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Great to have you.
Yes. How do you think your upbringing and your career and life journey led you to where you are today?
Gosh, that is a great question. Well, when I was young, my dream was to be an international woman of intrigue. So I think I've read lots and lots of spy novels, and I was fascinated with the CIA and the FBI. And all I knew was I needed to have a 4-year degree to go into the CIA. And I was in my second year of high school. And a young man my second year of college, and I was broke. I didn't know how I was going to make it to a 4-year university. And a young man sat next to me and started telling me about the Army's counterintelligence program and how I could chase spies across Europe. And so the next day, I went down to the Army recruiter's office, and I was wearing a black and white polka dotted dress and a fuchsia hat because it was the 80s. Remember that, ladies, back then?
Oh, wow.
And I signed up. And then 8 months later, I was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, at basic training, eating dirt for a living.
Oh,
wow.
And you were chasing spies across Europe.
6 months after that, I was assigned to Germany, and then I wound up arriving in Germany. They sent me to Belgium because I had taken 3 years of French in high school. Ooh. So whenever your parents tell you that you'll never use your French, I'm an example as to how you can. And so I wound up, I did 2 years in Belgium at the Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe. And then I transferred to Frankfurt, Germany, where I was on a specialized team that investigated the highest profile espionage cases across the European theater. And that was at the end of the Cold War. And so I was there when the wall came down. And I'll tell you, I went from a cocktail waitress at a comedy club before I left California to 6 months later, I was in Europe chasing spies. So it was really a fascinating time.
Oh,
but it's interesting how you wanted to do that and then ended up being able to do it in a very short time frame.
I was very excited. And that's why I always tell people the military is the way to go, because they will train you to do your dream job. And especially since I eventually got into cyber and computer forensics, the military, the Air Force, the Army, they're doing amazing things in the cyber world, and they'll give you a whole bunch of training for free. You have to give them a little bit of time. It's not completely for free. It changed my life. Being in the military for 6 years changed my life.
I'm really glad to hear that, because we really need training in cyber terrorism, especially now. I want to get to all of that, but I'd love to know about your podcast, Making Maverick Moves. Tell us what inspired you to do that, and also talk about the title. What's the reason for it?
Sure. So I started out with a podcast a few years ago, and it was called Lead Like a Lady. And when I created that title, I thought about Margaret Thatcher being the Iron Lady. And so that was kind of the inspiration for that title. And then I spent 2 years as the Chief Safety and Security Officer at LA Metro, wound up becoming a whistleblower, and that ended last year. And what I really learned from that experience, because I'm a big believer that everything happens for a reason, and that we are exactly where we are supposed to be. And, there were a lot of things that happened after I was terminated for the very first time in my life. And I wound up going on the media and talking about things that needed to change. And one thing that came to mind was this whole Maverick move, and what did that mean to me? And that means when you go and you're afraid of something and you do it anyway, that to me is a Maverick move. It could be a huge Maverick move. It could be a little Maverick move. But that's the thing. That's the only way that you're going to find breakthrough success is if you find that threshold and you move forward anyway.
You hope it's the right Maverick move.
That's true. But I think if you have the training and the experience, I liken it to when I was in the FBI and we would go to do an arrest warrant at somebody's house. So, we would do all of the work. We knew who our subject was. And, at 6:00 in the morning, you'd be stacked up, going up to the door. And there was a point where there was no turning back. You had to rely on your training. You had to rely on your expertise. You don't know, is the person asleep in bed or are they laying in wait for you to come through the door? But you need to go forward anyway, because, you're at a point where you can't turn back. So that's what I talk about when I do public speaking, talking about making that breakthrough success, that going out and doing an arrest warrant, you can be an entrepreneur doing the same thing, or a CEO or a mid-level manager. It's just a matter of not letting that fear hold you back by pushing forward anyway. And that's what your Maverick move is.
That's such a good message.
Weren't you, it is a great message, but weren't you nervous or scared every time you stood at someone's door, not knowing if they were standing there with a gun?
So, yeah, I mean, it definitely you think about a lot of different things before you walk up the night before. However, we're trained. That's what we learned at Quantico. We've done it many, many times before. There have been times where agents were shot and killed. In fact, there was an incident where two agents who were going to do a search warrant on a child predator, and he wound up shooting them and they both died. So it can happen. But again, you're trained, you're with your people, you're completely briefed on what's going on and what you're doing, and you've done a lot of homework ahead of time. So that's what gives you the confidence to move forward.
Mm.
Yeah, and FBI came before working at the LA Metro then, right?
Correct. Yeah, I was with the FBI for 22 years.
Each thing kind of leads to the next thing, right?
Correct.
Yes, you would just hear about an opportunity, or how do you decide to make such a big move leaving the FBI like that?
Well, I retired, and so you get to a point where you're eligible to retire, and I really wanted to do something creative. And so I actually, back then, I had a true crime podcast. And again, I did public speaking. I've always wanted to be a writer. In fact, when I was 16 years old, I was fascinated with the show MASH, and I loved Alan Alda. And so I would go and I would buy some flowers, and I would take them to 20th Century Fox and tell the gate guard that I had flowers for Alan Alda, and he would let me on to the set. Okay. Now, don't do that now, ladies and gentlemen, because that's called stalking. We didn't have that word back then. But again, I always wanted to create, be a creator of television. I'm always loving telling stories. And so that's something that I wanted to do. But then someone had called me and asked me if I was interested in the LA Metro job. And I said that I wasn't. And then a few months later, they called me back and said, hey, can you just speak with the CEO? And I said, okay, I'll speak with the CEO. And she told me that the bus operators were afraid to come to work. And that just tugged on my heart. And it was a fascinating experience, because I don't think that I call it the FBI a calling. But working there at LA Metro was really a calling for me as well, because it was an opportunity for me to serve not only the riders, but the frontline employees and make a system safe for them to go to work every day. So it was a really meaningful position.
And you made a big difference because it's a lot safer now. We
Yeah,
hope.
and yeah, in 2023, my team and I were able to decrease violent crime by 35%. So
That's a
yeah,
lot.
we were able to do a lot of great things while I was there.
Wow.
I always love hearing about everybody's steps in their life, the challenges they took. And tell us a little bit about the importance of female leadership in the workplace and what steps women can take to stand out in a male-dominated workspace. Like the FBI must have been very male-dominated, right?
Yeah, when I went into the Army, I think fewer than 10% of the soldiers were women, and that was in 1987, so I'm going to date myself a little bit. And then when I went into the FBI, about 14% of the agents were women. And even when I left 22 years later, it only got up to about 19 or 20%. So it really didn't rise that significantly. But what I tell the young women who are coming behind me is, you really have to lead authentically. You have to be an authentic leader. You can't take anybody else's leadership style and say, okay, this is how I'm going to lead.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, we if someone asks you, what is your superpower? You think, okay, well, I don't have a superpower. I may be really, really good at communications, or maybe I'm really good at problem solving, but everybody's good at communication. So I think we sometimes discount our superpowers and we don't really give ourselves credit. But what I've learned, what I'm really bad at, I'm not a patient person. No matter how much effort that I'm going to put into becoming patient is not really going to make a dent. But if I spent more time working on my superpowers, my problem solving skills and my communication skills, that's going to make me a much better leader. So I always tell people to figure out what your superpowers are and improve on those, because that's going to be a lot better and easier to make yourself the best than it is to try and be something that you're not.
You find that men in the workplace sometimes respond to that when you do that?
Well, I think it got to a point. It's funny because my mother, back in the 70s, became a single mom of two young girls. My dad left when I was probably like 6 or 7 years old, and she had to, take care of these two little girls. And she had been a hairdresser before she got married to my dad. And she decided she's going to go into real estate. And when you think of something like that, what a risk that was for her, because here she's going into a commission only field. And she worked so hard in the first year. She was selling these houses for like $35,000 a piece, and she made it into the $1 Million Club her first year.
Wow, that's quite impressive.
Whoa.
Yes. And so that was my role model. And I remember in basic training, I got pulled out of bed in the middle of the night to go and paint the first sergeant's office. And one of the women who was with me painting, she started talking about this glass ceiling. And I had never heard of a glass ceiling. That wasn't part of my culture where I came from. So I think I spent a lot of my career not buying into, okay, well, I'm a woman, so I have to act this way, or I have to do something this way, or I have to appease, different egos or anything like that. So I think if you don't allow that into your universe and you just do it the way you want to do it, you're going to be a lot more successful at it than having to worry about what other people are going to think.
Well, I was actually going to ask you about the Maverick moves or certain power plays that men and women should draw on to succeed in life and business. You sort of answered it, but I think has to be more. And also how your work as a counterterrorism expert applies to all of that.
Gosh. Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I think I've always been someone who, I have a lot of vision and I have big ideas, and I'm willing to risk certain things in order to see if a big payoff is going to come. So, and I think I get that from my mom or my dad. I'm not sure which, but, that whole Maverick move thing, again, is, we can talk ourselves out of anything. But
Mhm.
if you don't listen to that negative talk, and if you just push through, you'd be surprised at what you can accomplish.
Mm. Well, and I guess you had to do that every time you were sent out as an agent in the field.
Yeah, and in the beginning, because you don't really know what you're doing. My very first case was Thai girls being brought into the United States and forced into prostitution. So it was an involuntary servitude case.
Hmm. Oh.
And I was reading the case file, and there was an article where a detective from the Westminster Police Department, and that's in the Little Saigon district of Orange County, California, he had just rescued two of these Thai girls. So I'm figuring this is the guy. So long story, he and I start working together, and I was the only female with a gun in that task force of, all of these men. And it was so funny because I remember going in there and I kept thinking, these guys don't like me. And so one time I told Tommy, I'm like, I don't think these guys like me. And he goes, no, they like you. They just don't like the FBI. And it was like a whole thing that I didn't even think of, that local law enforcement didn't like the FBI. So they were treating me
Oh,
in a certain way, right? So again, it's that thought process that, we can hold ourselves back really, really easily, but
Mhm.
we have to kind of see the bigger picture in order to be able to move forward.
and you had
Mm.
that female thing going on. So you're thinking they must not like me because I'm female. And yet it was really your organization they couldn't stand. They didn't want people stepping on their toes. And
Exactly.
this sounds stupid kind of to say this, but I've watched all these shows on TV, and that what happens all the time. The FBI shows up, and then the NYPD on Law and Order hates it. Like, why is the FBI here?
Right.
They're still taking our
Right.
case. This is our
Yeah.
case. So I
Yes.
think a lot of people relate to this because we understand it on a very simplistic level with the
Hmm.
television that we watch. Tell us
Yes.
more about your experiences in fighting crime and cyber terrorism in Little Saigon and maybe some other places.
Yeah. So we worked everything from loan sharking to the involuntary servitude. Back then, the Microsoft CDs were being counterfeited, and there was a multi-million-dollar operation that we wound up taking down on that. Murder for hire cases. So there was a lot of violent crime going on back then. And it was an interesting time in Little Saigon because a lot of the criminals were targeting their own community because they knew that there was a distrust by the Vietnamese community for law enforcement. So it was really an interesting time, and having, being a big blonde walking around Little Saigon, the criminals knew who I was
Yeah,
automatically.
you stood out.
Exactly. And so that was a really interesting time. And then 9/11 happened, and pretty much everybody in the FBI was working terrorism after that. And the day before 9/11, terrorism was not a priority for the FBI. But then 9/11 happens, it becomes a priority. And that's when I wound up promoting, and I became the counterterrorism program coordinator for the Los Angeles field office. And I think within probably a year and a half period, we stood up about 15 squads to work counterterrorism and really address the threat in the Los Angeles territory.
Hmm. What about
My
other places
goodness.
besides Little Saigon? Talk about some of the other, well, what do you call them? Events that you worked on
Yeah.
or
So
situations?
Yeah. So, in order for us to promote to the executive level in the FBI, we have to go back to headquarters for about 18 months. And I wound up going onto the inspection staff, and that's where the FBI will come and inspect itself every 3 years. All the different field offices get inspected, and so I was a team leader on that staff, and they were looking for someone to inspect the cyber program in Chicago. Well, none of the team leaders had any technical expertise or cyber expertise whatsoever. I had been married to a cyber geek at one time. And so I figured, okay, at least I speak the language. And so I volunteered and wound up becoming the subject matter expert, even though I could barely turn on a computer. At least I knew what the priorities were and all of those things. So about a year later, the Los Angeles office created the first assistant special agent in charge position for cyber and computer forensics. And I wound up getting that job. And when I talk about leading authentically, I had learned from my mentors, my male mentors, that leading from the front is the only way to go. But when I got to Los Angeles to work with all these cyber geniuses, I was leading from the front, but then I would look around and nobody was following me because I didn't have those tech skills. So that's really when I had to figure out, okay, what are my strengths? And like I said, communication, problem solving. I had just come from headquarters, so I knew where all the money trees were so I can buy my people equipment. And so I wound up in that position for 11 years. And I think, there are a lot of favorite things that we did, but I was in charge of crimes against children investigations for about 7 years. And so
what did
all
that
those
entail?
So there were a lot of online predators. And so there were a lot of undercover cases that were going on to identify people who were targeting children. And I remember one case, there was a gentleman in Arizona. And I think one of my undercover agents had maybe a couple of chats with him and maybe a text. And the next thing you know, he drove all the way to Los Angeles just to get arrested for the FBI to have sex with a child. So when we talk about heroes, those agents who were working those cases and had to look at those photos of those crime scenes with those children, I hats off. I have a tremendous amount of respect for those folks.
That takes a moment to pause on that one. Yeah. Well, talking about older people now, there's so much fraud and scamming going on today that targets older people. Can you tell our boomer audience what types of fraud should they be looking out for, and about the Maverick moves they can take to prevent and protect themselves against scammers?
Yes. And that is a multi-billion-dollar problem, and it's heartbreaking. And so I know we all have heard about these folks in different countries who are reaching out to women and men, pretending that they're an engineer working on an oil rig in a different country, and they're looking to have a relationship and all of that. And you really have to make sure that the people that you're speaking to online, the people that you're chatting with, are who they say they are.
How do you find that out? They can use AI, they can create driver's licenses, they can create passports. How do you know?
So a lot of times, if they say that they're, John Jones from somewhere in Indiana, and they're working on this oil rig somewhere off the coast of who knows where, then, that person should have some sort of online presence that says who they are, where they live. You have to be a really good investigator, because the minute somebody, and this is a big red flag for everybody, they're going to come up with a lot of reasons on why it is that you should send them money. And if anybody is asking you to send them money, that is a problem. And you see it on Dr. Phil and all of the other shows where these poor women who are so in love because these scammers are going on ChatGPT, coming up with these beautiful poetic things that they want to tell you and make you feel like you are the most beautiful person in the world. But that's all part of it. When they want you to send them gift cards, when they want you to share your bank account information.
Oh, yeah.
Never, if somebody wants to give you $1 million, but all you have to do is give them $3,000 to open up some sort of bank account and pay an attorney or this, that, or the other, that's where we have a lot of elderly people and a lot of younger people, falling for that.
Yeah, or get rich quick schemes.
Exactly. So if it seems too good to be true, it is too good to be true. And if you meet somebody that you really, really like, FaceTime them and get them on video to see what they look like. If they have an accent, but they're claiming that they're American, that's a clue too. So I think we all kind of know that there's something not right, but sometimes it's easier to stay in the situation because it makes us feel good, but we just have to be really careful. But the number one thing, do not send money to anybody that you've never met or you don't know.
I got a good one today on my cell phone. I got a text and it said something like, you have an outstanding traffic ticket and we're going to press charges against you. And I'm looking at it, I thought, I don't have a traffic ticket. It had on the text a 63 area code, wherever that is in the world. So I went over to the auto club and I thought, where is this? I know it's fraud, but the lady there said, yeah, a lot of people have been coming in and asking about this. And she said, that's in the Philippines. I thought, oh, well, interesting. How did they get my cell phone information? So,
Yeah.
Yep.
And what... Yeah, but what I usually do, that if I get an email, say it's, and you know what almost gets me, and gosh, I'm telling my secrets here, for whatever reason, packages, right? UPS. And you think that UPS is legitimate. We've all heard of UPS, but if you go to the email address on the email that's sent to you, don't click on anything else. But if you click on the email address to see what the full email address is, if it's from UPS, it's not going to say, something at gmail.com.
Right.
So that's a way for people to kind of look and see, up front, okay, is this legitimate? Is it not legitimate? If you still think it's legitimate, don't click on any of the links, make a phone call and say, hey, is this it? But they'll put a phone number on there too. And then when you call into this call center, that's where you're going to have the opportunity to actually speak to a scammer who's going to try and tell you a story. So I ignore 99.9% of the emails that just don't seem right, because if they don't seem right, just ignore it. And believe me, if you're going to get arrested, someone else is going to contact you and give you some information.
Lately I've heard of another one too, huge gold scams going on around the world. That's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and diamond scams. I mean, how do you outsmart these guys?
Yeah, you just have to ignore it. Yeah, you just have to ignore it, because these people are probably sitting in a warehouse. There's a whole bunch of them. This is what they do, 8 to 10 hours a day, and that's their job. So you just have to really just be mindful that, to think, okay, this is a scam, okay, and then prove that it's not before you do anything.
Yeah, and then there's
what do you FBI people do, though? Do you play along with them at all? How do you catch them?
So there, if you've been scammed, there's ic3.gov, and that's where you can go online and you can report it to the FBI, or you can call your local field office, but it's going to be a lot easier just to go to ic3.gov.
That's capital I, capital C.
Yeah, I as in India, C as in Charlie, 3.gov, and that's where you can report it. But unfortunately, in order for the United States Attorney's Office to take a case, there's got to be a huge loss. So if you don't have a loss, or you have maybe a $10,000 loss or a $50,000 loss, it may not get investigated. So that's why we need to prevent these things from happening in advance by being suspicious and making sure that before you send any money or before you interact with people, you know that that's exactly who it is.
Good advice. Thank you.
Very difficult to do that. And, people just need to be on guard and realize not to reply to texts that come on your phone because somebody got your number.
No,
yeah,
it's hard.
It's hard.
There's that old one where I got a call from someone saying, "Your hi, I'm your granddaughter. I'm stuck in a country. Please help me. I have no money." And I thought, I don't have a granddaughter, but I've listened, and I thought that was pretty interesting. That's a real old one.
Oh yeah, and it's still going on. In fact, something that's news that I'm getting is that people are pretending like they're texting someone else, and then I'll say wrong number, and then they'll try and start a conversation with me. So that's what they're trying to do. They're just trying to find somebody that they can be friends with, and then the next thing you know, they're going to ask for money because that's how they get paid in their job.
They're very clever.
Yeah. And these guys that work in these factory warehouse, whatever they're using all day long, they maybe only get one bite all day, right? Because I know when I've accidentally picked up a number, I don't answer numbers if I don't know what they are. And thank you to iPhone, they now say spam risk on them, and I never pick them up. But once in a while, I'm expecting an appointment to call, and I don't know what their number is, so I pick it up. Always the person on the other end is so shocked you picked up. They go, and then they don't answer you right away. They don't even say. I picked up one the other day. The guy was so flabbergasted that I picked up. I just hung up on him right away. Yeah. But it was really pretty weird. So tell us about this. The LA Olympics are coming up in 2028. And with your professional experience, what steps can be taken to keep the public safe? Where are we with that? Do you know?
Well, I think it's interesting because Mayor Bass says that it's going to be a car-free Olympics, and that means that you're not going to be able to drive your car to any of the venues. And there's probably over like 20 or 30 different venues in the entire area, I think from Temecula all the way out to the valley. So it's a very, very large area. So my recommendation, and I've written an article on this on LinkedIn, is that we really need to make sure that we have collaborative interaction with all of the agencies. And when you think about it, how many different law enforcement agencies are within that huge territory that, the Olympics are going to be at. So there's got to be a lot of collaboration, a lot of coordination, and everything about public transportation needs to be safe and secure. And if you think back to the Paris Olympics, on the very first day on opening games, there was an incident on the train system. But, it's going to be different for LA because they're going to be busing people. So if one thing happens to a bus, it's going to be hard pressed to, get tourists and locals onto the buses to go to these venues. So they really, really need to be coordinating, and they need to make security the number one priority.
So you think even the far away venues like the Equestrian are going to have buses?
So
like not to Temecula and to the racetrack in Pasadena?
So all I know is what the mayor is saying, that it's going to be a car-free Olympics. And so how that's going to work exactly, but I do know that that Metro is going to be having probably twice as many buses as they normally do in any given day, which I think is close to 2,500 a day, to come in here to be able to get people to where they need to go. So it's going to be a huge logistical operations that they're going to need to put a lot of effort into.
Well, they'll have to train a lot more bus drivers. Who's going to drive those buses? Buses aren't easy. I had a brother driving a bus, and it's not easy to learn how.
It's not. I drove a bus. Well, it's only really once. Hard. I was in the bus rodeo that they had at LA Metro. So one year I got to drive the bus, and it's hard because it's a long vehicle.
It is.
Yeah. Yes. And what he told me was, when you're doing your training, you have these big mirrors on the side. When you pull up to the bus stop, like some of the bus stops have a station to sit in, if you hit the mirror on that, you're immediately fired before you even start working. That's during the training. If you even hit it during the training, you're out.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So you really have to be good with your depth perception. And it's not like 3,000 more buses can start working right tomorrow.
Yeah, they're going to have to coordinate it. That's for sure. But I love bus operators. They're one of my favorite groups of people because they are the captains of their ship. So if you want to see what leadership is all about, get on a bus with an experienced bus driver, and you'll see how they command. Their command presence takes over.
Absolutely. My brother loved it. He loved it.
Is there anything the public themselves, individuals can do to protect themselves at all?
Well, again, if you see something unusual, you need to say something and report it right away. And, being part of safety and security for the second largest transportation, agency in the country, it is everybody's responsibility. Safety and security is everybody's responsibility, not just the safety and security people. So everybody needs to put their phones down and be aware of their surroundings, and that's how they're going to stay safe.
So tell us a little bit more about your podcast, Making Maverick Moves, and also what new ventures are you working on today?
Gosh, well, my first episode after the rebrand, in fact, my very good friend introduced me to the LA City Fire Chief last year, and I wound up interviewing her. I think it was either in November or December last year before the fires. And so I interview her, I'm getting ready for my launch, and then the fires happen, and she goes on television and she spoke her truth to power. And so the 2 days before I launched that episode, she was fired from her job. So I think she kind of epitomizes the people that I want to showcase on my show, are the people who do, they know what the right thing is. When I spoke to her in November or December, whenever it was, she talked about, I asked her, tell me about a Maverick move that you've made. And she told me, Gina, I'm making a Maverick move right now because I don't have the resources to do my job. My people don't have the equipment to do their jobs. And so she told me well before the fires that was an issue that she was fighting at that time. So that really showed, that level of grit and that level of passion and commitment and dedication to the people in our community. So she's one of my guests. I've had coaches, experts, other people. We just recorded this week a mother. I call her the Maverick mom, whose son was being bullied. And she wound up writing an open letter on her social media to all of the parents of the kids who were bullying her son to talk about what her experience was. And it wound up being a beautiful story because a MMA boxing coach, he had a studio in her town, and reached out to her and gave her son free lessons, free boxing lessons. And so, when you think about the pain that she was going through to watch her son go through that, and then for her to take a stand. So I'm showing Maverick Moves in a variety of different lights. And so that to me really, makes me feel like I'm serving our community to inspire people to do great things. And I'm also a pup. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
I was
I'm
just
sorry.
going to
What's
say,
so interesting to me too is how early on you got into podcasting. You said you had a true crime one, and then you had the other one.
yeah, but like in 2020, I think. Yeah. So, and then, so not two, like before, I think, it's really, really saturated now, but yeah, I did it back in 2020.
We started in 2020 also.
We did.
Oh, good. Okay, so you were new too.
I'm sorry, I stepped
right
on
during
something.
the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
I stepped on something you were about to say.
Yes, I'm also a public speaker, a keynote speaker, in addition to being a TEDx speaker. And I talk about everything from rising to the top in male-dominated fields, leading through chaos, crisis, and change, and making your Maverick move. So that's something that I really enjoy doing to inspire people.
Just one question about chaos and dealing with that. Any advice for us dealing with chaos in our lives or in the world?
Yes, the number one thing you need to do is eliminate what you tolerate, because you are what you tolerate. So that's how chaos comes in. If you have so many things that you're tolerating, bad behavior from a family member, or even just your neighbor wanting to talk to you right on your way to work, and you're making you late every day to work, all of the little things add up, and that takes away the space that we have in order and the energy to go out and have that breakthrough success. So I tell the people that I work with, write down all of the things. It could be the boxes in your garage that are driving you nuts every time you get into the garage, to the leaky faucet that's been leaking for the last few weeks. And imagine how you're going to feel when you go drive into your garage and the boxes are cleaned up. You feel that extra space to be able to go out and conquer the world.
And create.
Exactly. And even, you don't have to address those big relationship things that you may be tolerating right now. Start with the easy things and start checking them off the list. And then you're going to have more space and more energy to be able to address the bigger matters.
And I was just going to ask you what you'd like our audience to have as a takeaway today. So do you want to add to that a little bit more advice for us?
Gosh, let's see. Gosh, with regard to chaos, you know what? I think one thing that I learned when I first started working at LA Metro, because it was in 2022, 2 years of the pandemic, no fare enforcement, no code of conduct enforcement. So it was kind of like a Mad Max and the Thunderdome scenario going on our metro system. If you read the newspaper, you would see it. And one thing that I would tell my people, because there were so many priorities, so many things to do, but I told them the first thing we need to do is get the water out of the boat. And they would come to me and they would have all these grand ideas of how we can paint the boat, how we can put accessories on the boat, how we can do all of these other things. But when you're dealing with crisis on a daily basis, the number one thing you have to do is just get the water out of the boat. Exactly. And then once the water's out of the boat, then you can fix the holes, then you can paint it, and then you can go on and make it into a yacht. But yeah, you have to start from the beginning or you're just going to be overwhelmed and you're not going to be able to deal with any of it.
I love that. Thank you. That's great advice for me because I have a lot of boxes sitting around that are making me crazy. So
okay, so tomorrow is Saturday. This is what your homework is, Mary Elkins. I want you to clean up those boxes, do whatever it takes. Get your family, get everybody, hire the kid down the street, come in, get those boxes cleaned up. And on Sunday, I want you to text me and tell me how you feel.
I don't know that I'll get all of them out, but I will get some, I promise you.
Okay,
Thank you.
good.
Thank you for the personal advice.
I love that she wants and I love that she expects a follow-up from you, Mary. But I'm going to take the same advice because I'm decluttering like crazy in order to kind of start fresh and open up the house and be more open and get the clutter out. So I have that same issue.
It feels good.
Feng Shui and declutter.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you for the personal advice. And thank you for, I'm sure our audience thanks you for this great podcast. Our guest today in Late Boomers has been Gina Osborn, former Chief Safety and Security Officer at LA Metro, retired FBI Special Agent in Charge, podcast host of Making Maverick Moves, and of course, former Army vet or just Army vet. And you can reach Gina if you need more advice at her website, Gina L Osborn. That's GinaLOSBORN.com. Thank you again, Gina. That's great.
Thank you, ladies. Yes. This is wonderful.
And thank you for listening to our Late Boomers podcast, everybody, and subscribing to our Late Boomers podcast channel on YouTube, where you can see this beautiful guest we have today. Please go to our new website, lateboomers.us. That's like Late Boomers Are Us. I love our new website title for info on all our episodes and links to everything. Listen in next week when you'll meet another exciting guest, talent agent Albert Bramante. You can listen to Late Boomers on any podcast platform, and we do appreciate you so much. Please follow us on Instagram. And thanks again, Gina Osborn.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Late Boomers, the podcast that is your guide to creating a third act with style, power, and impact. Please visit our website and get in touch with us at lateboomers.biz. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes of Late Boomers, go to ewnpodcastnetwork.com.
This podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. We hope you make use of the wisdom you've gained here and that you enjoy a successful third act with your own style, power, and impact.